Today, we're gonna take a look at the 10 most divisive JRPGs ever made. Half the world passionately loves them, the other half absolutely hates them. Yup, it's been that way for many years. So let's begin. Number 10, Star Ocean Till the End of Time. Some modern JRPGs are also quite divisive nowadays, but I won't cover them since they're fairly new and they need more time to establish a consensus, and then there are others that are way more hated than loved, like these ones for example. So with that said, let me explain why this JRPG is so divisive. Actually, the entire series kinda is. With the exception of the first two, everyone seems to either love or hate the others, but 3 feels like the one where the consensus can't make up its mind. For starters, the combat is convoluted with tricky controls, so it's hard to get into. It's also a very challenging game as a result. However, once you figure it out, it's a blast to exploit, and then the game ends up being somewhat easy. Also, there's some legendary horrible puzzles that most people agree are beyond hateful. But with a guide nowadays, you can easily overpass most of them. The final nail in the coffin for most haters is the story, especially the ending. No one has a problem with the narrative, the characters, the plot, or anything except the super ballsy ending the developers wrote for this. And since this is the last Star Ocean game in the chronology, it definitely overwhelms your perspective of the entire series. And that's why this third entry is the most divisive of them all, still after so many years. Number 9, Bravely Default. I don't know why people are so divided with this game, too many lovers and haters out there. I did play it, but ditched it after 8 hours because I found it boring. Storytelling was good, but the dialogue wasn't interesting. The gameplay mechanics were traditional, the graphics beautiful, and the music has some bangers. But most of the soundtrack was forgettable, the grinding and exploration repetitive, and I just didn't dig the chibi art style. Charging up one or several turns to do more damage in turn-based combat was an interesting twist. Though other games like Pierre Solar did it before, nothing original here. Besides, you know me, I'm not a fan of job systems, and relying on changing jobs constantly or every now and then to succeed? No thanks. And please don't be that dumbass who says, "You're missing out." Like, I don't give a damn? Trying to guilt trip players because they don't like something you do? It's beyond cliché, it's pathetic. But you know what? I don't hate this RPG. I appreciate it for what it is. Except for its god-awful, ridiculous and stupid censorship. Problem is, a crap ton of people feel the same way I do, while a crap ton had a blast with it and saw no issues with it. However, that infamous Chapter 5, where everything goes to hell, making you repeat boss fights several times, sounds awful, right? But believe it or not, there are many fans of this part. They liked it! Yeah, still a pretty divisive game nowadays. Number 8, Breath of Fire 2. Even after 3 long decades, this sequel is just as divisive as it ever was. Difficulty spikes, huge encounter rate, tons of backtracking, and cryptic objectives. Sometimes one of those where the heck do I go type of game. Even dedicated fans have a hard time denying all of these nuances. All they do is say that they didn't mind them, or most of them. On the other hand though, the game's got a lot of personality, interesting premise and storytelling apart from great music and graphics. The pixel art, man, it's just that the gameplay itself, especially when it comes to exploration and pacing, eradicates any desire to appreciate the rest. For a lot of people, myself included, it was impossible to go on after some point due to its disastrous adventure. But I'm sure many will gladly show up to prove me wrong even today, expressing how I'm missing out and whatnot. At least I admit the greatness in most areas regarding this classic, but I will never be able to overlook how tedious it was to make it as far as I did without rage quitting a second time. Number 7. Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Oh yeah, here we go again. Okay, so the fan says, the game's got strong world building. The hater says, it makes no sense. The fan says, huge world exploring, yeah! Hater says, I get lost very often. Fan says, great lore and deep narrative. Hater says, ruined by comedy and fan service. Fan says, and what's wrong with fan service? Hater replies, it hurts the story. Fan keeps saying, unique combat. Hater says, difficulty spikes. Fan says, beautiful graphics. Hater says, low resolution and frame rate. Fan says, great soundtrack. And hater finally says, yeah, it's great. Nice! They found some common ground. Now, where do I stand? I'm like many of you. I actually agree with every single thing both fans and haters say about the game. I see its greatness, but also its flaws. I just can't bring myself to think of these in black and white like I would easily do with others. I've met so many JRPGs like this in my life, examples being shown on the screen right now, where there's just so much good but also so much bad. It's just one of those, I guess. So after 7 years, the game's just as divisive as it was when it came out, and I don't think that's ever going to change. Number 6. Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse. Since this sequel came out, it has received nothing but polarized opinions. In terms of music, graphics and combat though, it was quite similar to its beloved predecessor. Thing is, that one was also kinda divisive when it came out, but nowadays everybody loves it for some reason. But along came Apocalypse to take the Division throne amongst the fans. Story now had more Persona-like characters, as in a bit more colorful, cheerful, comedic and immature, and the overall feel of the game, despite being dark as shit, confused gamers a bit. Well, I'm a big fan of both series, SMT and Persona, especially considering they are at their core one and the same, but I do believe this cast wasn't really ideal for an SMT4 sequel. However, I like it more for gameplay reasons, way more. 4 had some moments where mandatory side quests were getting in the way. You couldn't progress without doing them. Apocalypse didn't do that to you, and its gameplay was more fluid, less quest-driven, and more story-driven. I prefer that, and I think that's also the reason why a lot of people love this game. I honestly don't see any other issues with it, as it's got all other boxes checked in, no problem. It's just the narrative around the main cast of characters that made it so divisive. Maybe SMT4 didn't need a sequel in the first place and this game should have been its own thing? Number 5. Persona 3. I'm talking about the original PS2 versions here. People love to pick on this game merely for one simple reason. Okay, maybe two. First reason is because you can't control your allies during battle. Some small strategies can be given to them, but they mostly act on their own. And yes, they can mess up badly quite often, especially on normal or even hard modes. This is one of the very few turn-based RPGs in existence. I always play on easy, precisely because of that. But it's also an extremely beloved game because the story, the characters, the music, and the graphics are fantastic. Everyone knows it's got a greatly written plot with very memorable cast. Oh well, I guess the second reason detractors of this game offer commonly is the dungeon design. You basically explore just one tower in the entire adventure with many different floors looking the same, so it gets repetitive and boring after a while. I won't deny that, but I think that's also what made it appealing to me and a lot of fans out there. Then the PSP version came along, but the exploration outside the tower is done with menus and it's lame. Then the remake came out, but the censorship and politicized alterations were done. Suffice to say, there isn't a perfect version of what should be a perfect game to date. One that can please everybody out there. Number 4. Tales of Berseria. Ha ha ha! The Tales series! As if it didn't have plenty of divisive titles. Well, actually, it doesn't. Just a few like Legendia or Exilia 2, but not too many play those games. And then others like Zestiria or Symphonia 2, there's way more hatred than love. Berseria seems to be the one that brings out often the discussion of acceptance or rejection. I've seen many overpraising it like me, while others just overhate it. I don't understand the love for this game, they say. Well, I see nothing wrong with it, others say. But you know what? Barely anyone criticizes the story, characters, gameplay, and music. Most of its criticism appears under the combat tab or even the graphics. The graphics, we can all agree, look a bit dated because the game was originally released on PS3 only in Japan, and Namco didn't do a very good job upscaling them for the PS4 release. Fine, no one cares. But when you bring up the battle system, holy shit. In Berseria, you gotta set up 4 different combos for every action button in your controller, and that's where things go divisive. It takes forever to know which ones work better for this or that boss or enemies or whatever. The game can be stupidly hard or stupidly easy or both at the same time depending on the battle. 2 full playthroughs I did with it, one of them live, and I feel the same way. There's just a lack of balance. However, some games can still be extremely fun despite that lack of balance, but it is precisely that which makes people throw tantrums at each other still nowadays. Number 3, the Kingdom Hearts series. Classic Disney characters and movies meet Final Fantasy and the unquestionable, undeniable, magnificent genius of Tetsuya freaking Nomura. The outcome was a massive commercially successful series that's still going nowadays. Despite Nomura defending beautiful female characters in video games, and Disney being the wretched evil that loves losing money with awful DEI movies, nope, you didn't hear me wrong, the series is still going nowadays. Hypocrisy, I'm telling you. It wasn't this divisive when it first came out though. I remember the first 2 games were very well received on the PS2 and drew in a lot of fans. And despite me not being a fan at all of the series, I myself greatly enjoyed the second one. But then Chain of Memories happened, both on PS2 and Game Boy Advance. And then one more spin-off. And then another one. And then another one. And then Square Enix continued to milk this while Nomura kept losing his mind with a convoluted universe that was dumb beyond belief. By the time Kingdom Hearts 3 finally happened, the world had lost all faith in the storytelling and extremely mixed reviews accompanied their release. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it, this series has become a meme. A big meme, and whenever someone thinks about it, fan or not, they can't help but think of the disaster it's become. Nevertheless, millions of gamers still adore the series and patiently wait for the next installment. Number 2, Chrono Cross. There's not much to say about this game apart from what I've said for years. It's mostly Chrono Trigger fans who hate it passionately simply because it wasn't the sequel they wanted. And to date, a lot of them continue to trash it without even knowing what happened. Masato Kato wanted to create a different game, but Squaresoft said no. It needed to be Chrono and it needed to be a sequel. Soon after its release, he and the team had to go out and say this wasn't Chrono Trigger 2, and that hopefully people will appreciate it for what it is. Maybe some fans understood that, but then they got into the battle mechanics and lost it. A complex combat with strange RNG and elements galore! I'm sure some of you who have never played this game have seen me playing it and said, what the heck is he even doing? What the hell is even happening here? It takes a while to get the gist of battle, I admit that. And as much as I love it, I have to admit it wasn't the best idea for the long-awaited second Chrono game, sequel or not. I think its biggest mistake was that Squaresoft forced Kato to include the Trigger cast or connected to it in the first place in one way or another. Man, this game should have been its own thing. Still, and thankfully, there are millions of fans who passionately love this masterpiece just like me. But today, it still stands as one of the most divisive JRPGs of all time. Number 1, Final Fantasy XII. And maybe everything that came after that. Man, nothing's changed since this game came out, hasn't it? I'm of the opinion that it's a great game, but that it doesn't really feel like a Final Fantasy game. It feels like a Yasumi Matsuno game, as in part of the Ogre Battle series, but with Final Fantasy elements. Kinda like what Final Fantasy Tactics was, and that's no coincidence since it takes place in the same universe, but then Matsuno left halfway through and the game went into a different direction. He claims the hated Vaughn was actually planned and developed by him as the main character, but has either dodged or refused to answer questions as to his dialogue, personality, or nearly irrelevant part in the story. Whether we may someday or not know the truth about this, the fact remains that this game was pretty divisive, and still is, mostly because of Vaughn. But another big reason is because the gameplay felt completely new and very different. The fact that it resembled more an open world meets an MMORPG but offline didn't sit very well with many gamers. Then there was the difficulty. Since it was practically a new combat with new mechanics, most just didn't know how to handle the controls or the strategy, so they ended up dying a lot. But of course the last straw was the skill tree system, convoluted at best. However, all of these features have many lovers out there, passionate fans who will defend these combat and gameplay mechanics no matter what. Me? I like everything about it except Vaughn and the gruesome grinding needed to gain one stupid level. In conclusion, I think this game lacks identity. This is when Square Enix had no fucking clue what to do with the series anymore, so they just started copying ideas from other successful franchises, mixing them all together to see what happened. Well, the result was a very divisive game, and everything after this has been exactly the same. Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy XV, Final Fantasy XVI, and many other spin-offs. Every single Final Fantasy game nowadays is just as divisive, if not more, but this one seems to be the one that started it all. Yeah, apart from this other jackass, of course, yeah. Alright, that's all for today's list, but I'm sure you'll have a really good time listing every single divisive JRPG I didn't include in the comments. Yeah, you go ahead and do that, and I'll just keep missing out. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!